Okay, good evening. Delay of game. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin Daf Tes Vav. A little bit of a challenging blot, and we're going to be stopping at the top of Tes Zayin Amud Aleph. We were in the middle of analyzing a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer in a brisa, not in our Mishnah, and we're Tes Vav Amud Aleph 10 lines down. And in that brisa, we really are in the midst of a sugya. We were analyzing some of the differences between the Tanakama and Rabbi Eliezer as it relates to a case of a person who either sold themselves into slavery or someone who was sold by Bezin. The Gemara says, my time of the Tanakama, why is it that the Tanakama held Amar mocher atzmo ein ma'anikin lo, that if a person sells himself into slavery, that he doesn't get gifts when the person sells him? Says the Gemara, because there's a difference between a person who sells themselves and a person who is sold by Bezdin. Mi'et Rachmana gabe machru Bezdin, that because of a case of machru Bezdin, when he sold that way, that's when the pasuk says ha'anek ta'anik lo v'lo l'mocher la'asma. There's a difference between them. So therefore, when it's machru lebezdin, then there are gifts ma'anikin lo, and when he sells himself, ein ma'anikin lo. Fine. What does Rabbi Eliezer say about this distinction? Because Rabbi Eliezer held that they both had the same din. That even if you're machru la'atzmo, even if you're mocher la'atzmo, you still do get the gifts when you are sent out. Says the Gemara, he would say ha'umi boile lo v'lo l'yorshab, to say that the gifts go to the Eved when he departs, but not to his yorshim. And says the Gemara, though the Gra does take out the next two lines, you can look at the side here, the Hagos HaGra removes it, makes the Gemara quite difficult with and without them, but we're not going to dig into that. So it says the Gemara, wait 1 second, Yorshav Amaylo, he pushes back. The Tanakama says, Rabbi Elazar, why would you say that? Yorshav Amaylo, why would I get it? Sachir Kari Rachmana. The money that the Eved gets, even if it's in the form of a gift, is still considered his parnasa. It says the Gemara, Maschir Piulaso the Yorshav, just like the Eved, when he makes money, it goes to his Yorshim. Afhai Piulaso the Yorshav. Ella, it must be that really what Rabbi Elazar is saying is not lo velo the Yorshav, but rather lo velo lebal chovo. To say no, what Rabbi Elazar meant is that the money that he's getting as a gift can't go to someone to whom he owes money. So let's say as the Eved is leaving, he owes the mafia some money. We don't that you can't give that money to the mafia. It has to stay with him. What does this mean? Says the Gemara, a third of the way down, it's fair lon be'alma ki Reb Nassan, because we typically hold like Reb Nassan Tanya. This is a brisa that we've seen already 3 times in Shas. It says, Amar Reb Nassan minayin lenoshe bechaver mana. If Ruvain owes, let's say, person 1 owes person 2 money, person 2 owes person 3 money, how do we know that we take the money from 1, skip over number 2, and give it to person number 3? Where do we know this from? Says the Gemara, Asham lo. And says the Gemara that asa lo, the word lo in our case, the pasuk that Rabbi Elazar is darshaning is la'afuke, to teach us that we don't allow for this to happen, that we don't allow the money to be transferred from the Eved to the third party, from person 1 to person 3. We don't allow that in this case. What would the Tanakama say about this? The Tanakama would say, Ba'alma, I disagree with you in general. Nami lo sviril and Krib Nasan. We don't hold like Krib Nasan that 1 can give to 3. That's not a normal transaction. This is not quite Maimed Shloshtan, where everyone's standing in their own presence, which we spoke about in the previous Masechta. But this is talking about 1 owes 2 and 2 owes 3, even when they're not in front of one another. And the machlokes, seemingly, between the Tanakam and Rabbi Elazar, is whether or not we hold like Reb Nassan. And Lamaisa, that's why we have a difference between the Tanakam and Rabbi Elazar about this din of ma'anikin, about giving gifts. Let's go to another distinction between the Tanakam and Rabbi Elazar. Again, all based on the brisa from the previous Amud. Says the Gemara, my time of the Tanakama. Why is it that the Tanakama of the brisa held Amar mocher atzmo ein rabba moser lo shivcha kanainis, that when a person sells himself, that he cannot sells himself into slavery, that he's not allowed to get a shivcha kanainis, that the master cannot give him a shivcha kanainis to have children? Says the Gemara, because mi'et rachmana gabe machru bezdin, because by machru bezdin we had a pasuk that told us that the din only applied over there. Imado naviyitem lo isha lo v'lo lemocher la'atzmo. When do we say that a Rav can give the Eved a shivcha kanainis to build avodim? That's only true if it's machru bezdin, because the pasuk was talking about that when it said imado navi ten lo isha. Therefore, we make a diuk from there. It only applies in the case of machru bezdin, but machru la'atzmo, the man sells himself into servitude. So then the din is that the Baal cannot give him a shivcha kanainis to have children with them. Idach, what does Rabbi Elazar say? Lo means bal korcho, that we can force him. That's what it means. We can force him to have a shivcha kanainis. Idach, what would the Tanakama say? No, that we learn about forcing, that you can allow under certain circumstances in the case of the machru lebezdin to force Shivcha Kanain is that we learn Mechi Mishneh Sachar Sachir Nafka. The Tanya Ki Mishneh Sachar Sachir Avdecha She Avdecha Sachir Eino Oved Ela B'Yom. A regular worker only works during the day. Eved Ivri Oved Ben B'Yom Uvein B'Layla. And Eved Ivri works all day and all night. Says the Gemara, how is that possible that a person works 24 hours a day without a break, halfway down? We have a din by an Eved Ivri that he has to be treated the same way you'd want to treat yourself. It's basic. If he gets food, you get food. If he gets to sleep, if you get to sleep, he gets to sleep.
He can torture the slave?
Obviously not.
Right.
Obviously not. No, I mean, it's a letivusa. No one, if you want to flog yourself with a whip, that's your issue. That doesn't mean you're allowed to flog your Eved. That's not allowed. So we're talking about the positives, and it's v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. That's not it's the things that are positive. By the way, otherwise the halacha v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha would look very different. If you have someone who has
question.
yeah, it's the same thing. If a person has suicidal ideations and it makes them happy, they can tell you to jump off a bridge. Saying it's not, that's not v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. It has to be positive. It has to be a positive thing. So therefore, what the Gemara says is you don't work 24 hours a day. You can't have your Eved work 24 hours a day. Ella, it must be that when we say that an Eved Ivri has to work day and night, it must be that there's another implication. That she can be, is that he can give, he can force an Eved that was sold into servitude by a Bezdin. You can force him to have a Shivcha Kananis, and the Oved at night means that at night he'll be with her and they'll have children. That's what it means to work full time. What would the other sheet hold? If you learned it from there, that it's only with his opinion. I might have thought that if it was against his will, maybe not. Kamash Malan, that's not true. That source is not enough. So we needed the two sources combined to learn the din. Now, what was happening here, and this sugya is very lengthy in regards to pages of Gemara. And if we were learning this cleanly, we would have broken, we would have had to learn 3 blots straight to make this sugya clear. So I'm just saying outright that this is a little complicated, but we're really about to switch gears now to learn a second possible answer. Yesterday, we had learned a drasha about Sachir Gzeir Shava, and we wanted to know who the detractor was. We gave one answer and got into this lengthy dialogue. And now the Gemara says, 2/3 of the way down, Elaman Tanu Delo Yalif Sachir. If that first person is rejected, because we see now that both the Tanakam and Rabbi Eliezer from the Bryce at the bottom of Yudal and Beis hold of Sachir, and really it's just a machlokas and how to understand the psukim and the drashos. If that's true, then we don't have someone who holds negatively about Sachir. So says the Gemara. Elaman Tana Delo Yalif Sachir. Hai Tana Hu Detanya. It's the following pasuk. The pasuk says V'shav el mishpachto. The pasuk reads that he goes back to his family. And this pasuk refers to an Eved Ivri who's returning to his family during Yovel. Now let's see what Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov has to say. I'm Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. If you want to say we're talking about where one is mocher la'atzmo, a person sold himself into slavery, so that Harei Kvar Amor, we already have psukim about that. So that can't be what V'shav al Mishpachto means. Ibn Nir, so if you're talking about a man who decided he wanted to be a permanent slave and they poked a hole in his right ear, Harei Kvar Amor, that also has a pasuk. So that can't be what V'shav al Mishpachto means. Ha'ein hakasav medaber elo. What is this pasuk of V'shav al Mishpachto? What does it mean? B'machru bezdin shtayim v'shalosh shanim lifnei hayovel. This pasuk of V'shav al Mishpachto means that someone was sold by Bezdin into slavery 2 to 3 years before Yovel. And what is the chiddush of this din? Yovel motzio, that even though he will only have been an Eved for a couple of years, he didn't even get through one Shemitah cycle. He got in the 47th year or whatever, the 47th year of a Shemitah cycle, it became an Eved. So Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says that this pasuk teaches us Yovel motzio. So he's a Yid, he's going back to his family, and he goes back to his family during Yovel. What is the chiddush of the pasuk? It's that he was there for less than a Shemitah cycle. In year 46, 47, the Bezdin sold him as an Eved. Done. And says the Gemara, this was the raya that we needed. V'isal kadaitach yalif sachir lamali. Why would it be that if I held of the drasha of Sachir, I would not need this drasha, Yovel Motzio, because Sachir would already teach me that Yovel is Motzio. So therefore, Neilav Sachir, I should have learned the fact that the person goes free, even if he was only sold as an Eved in the 47th year of the Yovel cycle. Afal Pikim, we should have learned it from Sachir. Why then do we have the pasuk of V'shav el mishpachto? Elamai, it must be that this Tana doesn't hold of the Gzeira Shava of Sachir. So therefore we have our source. Amar Rab Nachman Bar Yitzchak, no, Le'olam Yalev Sachir. Really, Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds of the drasha of Sachir. V'itzrich, we still need the pasuk of V'shav el mishpachto to teach us that even if he's sold in the 47th year of a Yovel, that he'll still go free during the Yovel year, afal pi, that there hasn't been the requisite 6 years before it, because Sal Kadai Techamina, 4 lines before the wide lines, I might have thought that had we only had V'shav el mishpachto, I would have thought Mocher Atzmahu Delo Avadi Surah. Maybe we're only talking about a person who sells himself into servitude where he never did anything wrong. Aval Machruhu Bezdin Do Avadi Surah, but when Bezdin sells someone into servitude, why would Bezdin sell someone into servitude? Because they owe money that they can't repay. So that guy's like, the Bezdin says, too bad, we have to sell you. You owe the guy $800,000. You're destitute. You got to go work for him to pay off your debts. So when a person is sold by Bezdin, so that's because it was Avadi Surah. He did something wrong. So then I might have said, Ema Niknase. I might have said that there should have been a knas over here that he doesn't go free by the Yovel, Kamash Malan, that in fact he does go free. And then the pasuk of V'shav mishpachto exists even though he holds of Sachir. Sachir might have only told me about a case of a person who's mocher atzmo, a guy who sells himself into servitude, and he is only sold into servitude by himself in year 47. Okay, fine. And then v'shav al achuzah, so that he can go free. Or maybe I should say Sachir, that's why he goes free. Why the extra pasuk? It's for a case where a person was being sold by Bezdin. Omar, let's analyze one of the things that we just learned. Says the Gemara, Ibn Nirtza, we learned in the Brisa above that when we were analyzing the pasuk of V'shav el mishpachto, we said the pasuk can't be talking about Nirtza because Ibn Nirtza harei kvar amor. Says the Gemara, Maihi, what's the source for this? That we already learned about Nirtza. Says the Gemara, last of the short lines, the Tanya. The pasuk reads V'shavtem isha lachuzaso v'isha mishpachto b'ma kasav medaber. What was the pasuk talking about over here? What does this pasuk mean when it says V'shavtem isha lachuzaso v'isha mishpachto even mocher atzmo harei kvar amor? Can't be talking about a guy who sells himself. That's already been spoken about. Even Machru Bezdin Harei Kvar Amar. And so too the case of Machru Bezdin, there too, Harei Kvar Amar, that's been discussed. And now what we understand from this pasuk is why Nirtza wasn't included in the previous brisa. Says the Gemara, Hayina Kasim Dabrel Ben Nirtza Shtaim V'Shalosh Shanim Lifnei Yovel. Let's say this guy says, hey, I'm willing to be your Eved permanently. They take him to the door, they drill a hole in his right ear, Shalom Yisrael. But he did it in year 47 or 48. So there isn't even going to be one Shemitah cycle. The Gemara says, Shayova Motzio, Chiddushin, that when the Nirtza has only been a Nirtza for a few years, it should be Va'avado le'olam. So it should be. But Yovel is the interrupter. So, but he did it in year 47, not even one 6-year Shemitah cycle. So, like, does that count? Says the Gemara, Shayova Motzio. My mashma, where do we get this from? How do we know from the pasuk of V'shavtem isha lachuzaso? The Ishal Mishpachto, that a person who's a Nirtza but only became a Nirtza 2 to 3 years before the Yovel kicked in, how do we know that this person still goes out by Yovel? Says the Gemara, we learn it from the word Ish, Amarava, Barshila, 4th of the wide lines, Amakra Ish. That's the pasuk of V'shavtem Ish el achuzaso. Ezu davar shenoheg be'ish ve'enoheg be'isha. Which aspect of slavery by the Eved HaIvri or the Ivriya, which only applies to the male, says the Gemara, Havi Omer Zoritzia. So therefore we see that when the pasuk says V'shavtem isha lachuzaso, that it's talking about a case of a man who, and not a woman specifically, who became a Nirtza in year 46, 47 within the last Shemitah cycle. And the Chiddush of this brisa is that the Nirtza, who's only been a Nirtza for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, still goes free b'Yovel. And what that shows us is that when the pasuk says by a Nirtza va'avado le'olam, we define le'olam as Yovel. Yovel has the status of le'olam. We would never have translated that way in our parlance in English. If you're my slave forever, that implies until you die. That's how we would have thought. Whatever we think is often wrong in regards to Torah standards. The Torah says le'olam is defined by Yovel. So afal pi, that you're a Nirtza. So we have a case here by Nirtza, and we also have the previous case as well, which was talking about a similar case, which also said that he had to be released even if he only became an Eved in year 47. Here he became a Nirtza in year 47. In both cases, says the Gemara, you go free with Yovel. And now the Gemara is bothered. Why do I need two cases? Why do I need a case of a regular guy who's mocher la'atzmo? And why do I need this case of nirtza? Why both? One din should be enough. And says the Gemara into 5 or 6 lines into the wide lines. And even in the case of Machru Bezdin, he goes free in the Yovel. Both of these cases had to be taught, even though they both have a similar din. Machru Bezdin in year 47, and the case of Nirtza, they both go free in Yovel. Why do I need both cases? I might have thought that in regards to a person who was sold into servitude by Bezdin, maybe that would not have been an exiting at Yovel, because it wasn't even 6 years. Aval nirtza demato izmane, he already did accomplish something because he was a nirtza. Ema niknase, we should say he doesn't go free. Kamashmalan, that's not true. V'yeshmin and nirtza, I might have thought that the nirtza mishum do avad leishesh, because he normally does 6 years. Aval machruhu bezdin, the lo avad leishesh emalo. I might have thought that the case of machru bezdin, which isn't a typical 6-year move, it's usually longer. Tzricha, therefore, we needed both cases to teach us, both by machru bezdin and by a case of nirtza, that if they get close to the shnas hayovel, and that's when they start their servitude or their nirtza status, the din is that they go free by yovel. And says the Gemara, "V'itzrach also lemichta." We need to also have 2 psukim v'shavtem. That's the pasuk we started with on the first of the long lines, and also v'itzrach lemichtav la'olam. Even though they both have seemingly similar implications, that you get to go free. The pasuk of v'shavtem says that you get to go ish alachuzaso after the yovel, and here it says that le'olam you go back. Yikasav rachmana le'olam, havamina le'olam mamish. If I only had the word le'olam and nothing to contrast it, I might have thought that the word la'olam means what we would thought it would have meant, literally, which is forever. Therefore, kasav rachmanu v'shavtem, to offset the word la'olam from meaning forever, to mean instead of yovel. Because of rachmanu v'shavtem, had the Torah only said v'shavtem and not la'olam, havamina hani mili hechad lo avad sheish, only up to 6 years. Aval hechad lo avad sheish lo yehei sofo chamor mitfilah. So the end shouldn't be more chamor than the beginning. What does this mean? Says the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom, matchilaso sheish afsofonami sheish. I might have thought that in the beginning, your first frame of servitude when you become an Eved is 6 years, so too in the end, and therefore you should go free after 6 years. Kamash malan leolam, and says the Gemara leolamo shel yovel. That teaches us that the blending of the 2 words v'shavtem and olam, we need both of those words to teach us that when we say leolam, it only means the 50th year, and then you go free no matter what. But again, after 2 attempts, and again, tying back to yesterday's Gemara, when we're trying to figure out who the dissenting opinion is about the Gzeir Shava of Sachir, says the Gemara on the last line of Tezvav Ben Aleph, Elaman Tana de lo Yalif Sachir. Who's the Tana who doesn't hold of the Gzeir Shava of Sachir? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the Tanya, because we have a brisa that indicates as much. Turning to the top of Tesvavim and Beis, the Gemara says, "V'im lo yigal be'ele." If you don't get redeemed by these, and in the context of the psukim, if we saw them all in a chumash, we'd know that the pasuk that it's referring to is when the pasuk says, "O dodo, O ben dodo yigalena," that your family members could redeem you. So that's what it means. V'im lo yigal be'ele. If you're not going to be redeemed by these, the word be'ele refers to family. That's what Rashi says on the top of the page. Dibur hamaschil be'ele bekrovim tichsiv le'el minei o dodo. So what the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Omer be'ele hu nigal, he can be freed by his family members, but 6 years isn't going to be enough to free this person. I might have argued the following. Says the Gemara, Uma, in regards to a case when a person is sold to a Jew, if a person wouldn't have been freed by his family members, he would be freed after 6 years. When you're sold to a goy shenigal be'ele, where you are redeemed by your family, eino din shenigal b'sheish, all the more so you should be redeemed by the 6th year. Again, as mentioned, some of these gezeira shavas are very hard to understand on their face. They require time, which we don't have, but we can trust the system that this is a valid kal v'chomer. But we're going to reject it in a moment because of a pasuk. But it's logical. Talmud Omar be'ele. Hu nigal ve'ein nigal b'sheish. That in this particular case, that he only goes free by family members be'ele, and ve'ein nigal b'sheish, he will not go free with the 6th year. And says the Gemara, ve'isal kadaitach yolav sachir. The reason we know that Rebbe is our dissenting opinion about the gzeira shava of sachir, says the Gemara, If I were to have had the drasha of Sachir, Amai Ka'amar, why would he have ever said Umisha Eno Nigal Be'ela? That's not correct. We would have had that. Neilach Sachir. I could have learned from the Gzer Shava. Elamai, it must be that Rebbe doesn't hold of the Gzer Shava of Sachir. So says the Gemara here too. Amar Rav Nachman Reitzach La'olam Yalif Sachir. I disagree. Really, Rebbe would be of the opinion that we learn the Gzer Shava of Sachir. B'Shani Hacha. This case is different. To Amar Kra Yigal Lenu. This pasuk says that they will be redeemed. Lazeh v'lo la'acher. And when it says lazeh v'lo la'acher, that's only in a case where he's sold to a goy, but not in a case where he's sold to anybody else. And that is the shita of Rebbe. And Rebbe, in fact, does hold of Sachir. And we basically don't have a shita that argues the Gzeir Shava of Sachir. All of the cases that appeared that way were really dealing with other issues, and we seem to not really have an opinion against Sachir, which means as we reverse engineer and go back to yesterday's blotting the Daladim and Bays, we do have a fine Gzeir Shava of Sachir. Uman Tana de Poligale de Rebbe. Who is the shita that argues with Rebbe's shita that we just learned? This shita of Rebbe that he can be redeemed by his family. So says the Gemara, Rebbe Yossi Haglili the Rebbe Akiva. Two dissenting opinions. One dissenting opinion on Rebbe is Rebbe Yossi Haglili, the other is Rebbe Akiva the Tanya. Quarter of the way down in a brisa. Lo yigal be'ela. The pasuk says they cannot be redeemed with these, as mentioned. The these that we're referring to, as Rashi said on the top of the page, is talking about family members. Ododo, his uncle, Obendodo, which is talking about his cousin. Rebbe Yossi Haglili Omer be'ela l'shichur. When family members redeem him, that's the be'ela. Then they go free. But Bishar Kol Adam, if anybody else would redeem them, they'd go into shibud into that person. So let's say I don't know you, I'm not your family member, but I redeem you, then you become in servitude to me. Rabbi Akiva Omer Be'ela l'shibud, the opposite, that when family members redeem them, then those family members have this cousin, whoever it is, the dodo, the ben dodo, the uncle, whatever it is, then he's in servitude to his family. We'll discuss this shita shortly. But b'shar kol adam l'shechur, if anybody else were to free this man, so then he would be completely free. And the Gemara wants to understand the shita of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says that if a family member were to free this person, then they'd be completely free. And that if any other person were to do that, they'd be in servitude. My time of Rabbi Yossi, third of the way down, my time of Rabbi Yossi Haglili. So says the Gemara, because Amar Koim lo yigal be'ela ela be'acher v'yatsa b'shnas hayovel. If he's not redeemed by his family members, ela be'acher, he's redeemed by somebody else, he'll still be yotze b'shnas hayovel. Rabbi Akiva Omer, no, in lo yigal ela be'ela, if he's redeemed only by his friends, by his family, then v'yatsa b'shnas hayovel. So that would be the pasuk machlokes between them. And why is it that Rabbi Yossi Haglili doesn't agree with Rabbi Akiva? But Rabbi Yossi Haglili midi ela be'ela ksiv. The pasuk doesn't say what you want to say. You want to say that the way to understand the pasuk Rabbi Akiva is that in lo yigal ela be'ela, and that's not what the pasuk says. Rabbi Yossi Haglili says midi ela be'ela ksiv. Ela b'haikra kemifligi. Really, what they're talking about is the following. And if this isn't hard enough, just pay attention for the next few lines so we can understand this piece, because we won't understand the rest of the Gemara without it. The Gemara says as follows: really, Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi are arguing about the following pasuk. Three pieces. The pasuk says first, Odo do Obendo do Yigalena, those are family members, Zegi Ulas Krovim. And then the next pasuk says, the next part of the pasuk says, Oh Hisiga Yado, Zegi Ulas Atzmo, that's a person who redeems himself. So we have family, and then we have himself, and then we have Nigal, which is Zugu Ulas Acherim. So we're going to be analyzing this specifically ordered list of the drasha. We have family members, himself, and acherim. How does Rabbi Yossi Haglili understand these three parts of the pasuk? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yossi Haglili savar mikra nidrash lefanov, that the mikra is talking about the element before it. What does this mean? So this is how he understands the pasuk. Shadi geulas krovim a geulas atzmo. We take geulas krovim and put it in the category of geulas atzmo. Ma geulas atzmo l'shichrur af geulas krovim l'shichrur. Just like geulas atzmo, the fact that he can redeem himself works to free him, and we're going to then take krovim and put it in that category, and then he can be freed by his family members. Rabbi Akiva savar no mikra nidrash la'acharav. Shadi geulas acherim, not to the earlier case, but to the latter case, we take geulas acherim and we put it into the category of geulas atzmo. Ma geulas atzmo l'shichrur af geulas acherim l'shichrur, and therefore they argue in the case of krovim. Rabbi Akiva holds that in the case of krovim, that's where he disagrees with Rabbi Yossi. Says the Gemara, Hachi be'ele lamali. If that's true, then why do I need the pasuk of be'ele? Because then according to Rabbi Akiva, the word be'ele wouldn't be free. According to Rabbi Akiva, they'd be in servitude if they were freed by a family member. So that's a kasha on Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, he answers like this: 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more, 15 lines from the bottom. Ila be'ele. If we didn't have the word be'ele, so then havamina mikra nidrash bein lefanu bein laachra ve'akol l'shechra. Without the word be'ele, I would have thought that everyone in the pasuk gets to go free, whether or not it is done by a family member, done by himself, or done by another person. So therefore, we needed the word be'ele. Yihachi, if that's true, hadar koshia leduchta. If that's true, then we have our question right back on Rabbi Akiva right now, because according to this, Rabbi Akiva Shita makes no sense at all, because our approach right now says that everyone would go free, and that's not what Rabbi Akiva holds. So says the Gemara, another possible answer is Ela b'svara kamiflagi. Really, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yossi Aglili and Rabbi Akiva are arguing just in logic. So what does that mean? Well, the Gemara articulates its explanation of the machlokas between the two of them. Rabbi Yossi Aglili savar mistabra geulas acherim l'shibud. It makes more sense that if a random person redeems someone, that person would be in shibud, because if you want to say that when a random person redeems someone that they go free, so then havu mimnei v'lo pirkele. Why would I free you with no benefit to me? I'll leave you in heaven, it doesn't help me. So if I free you, obviously there must be some benefit. It must be that there's some servitude. But Rabbi Akiva argues, he says, Mistabra gulas krovim l'shibud. It makes more sense to say that when a family member redeems this guy, that there's an obligation from the person who's redeemed to the family, and he'd be an evet. If every time the family would go to free this guy, he wouldn't have a shibud to the family. He's going to keep selling himself for whatever short-term benefit he gets for being an evet. His family is going to come redeem him. He's going to keep doing the same crime over and over again. This is the explanation of their sheet that's based on Svara, that according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, we assume that when a random guy would do the redemption, it makes more sense that there should be a shibud, because otherwise, why would someone redeem him? According to Rabbi Akiva, it makes more sense if there's shibud when the family member redeems him, because otherwise, he's going to keep doing the same shtick over and over again. If his family doesn't have him in servitude, there's nothing that's going to stop him from going back into servitude for short periods of time. It says the Gemara, all of that was Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi Aglili. The Chachamim say, forget their machlokas. Everybody is going to make this person free. Family members, himself, and the Acherim. Man Chachamim, who is the sheet of the Chachamim? So says the Gemara, Rebbe he, and this is the sheet of Rebbe. The mapik le lahai be'ele l'drasha achrina. He uses the word be'ele for something else. And as we had articulated about 15 lines ago, a little bit less, the word be'ele was needed to ensure that something didn't go free, that some model didn't go free. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi argued as to what that was. Was it that what doesn't go free is when it's a family member, or is it with acherim? The Rebbe says, forget about all of that. The word be'ela is used for something else. And therefore, the case of le'atzmo was a case which is similar both to a case of family members and to the case of acherim, and therefore everyone would the evet would be completely free under all of these circumstances. Asks the Gemara 3 lines from the bottom, Rebbe, according to Rebbe, what then does the pasuk of Yatsa B'Shnas HaYovel mean to you? So says the Gemara on the bottom line, and with this we're going to close at the 4th line of Tezayin with Aleph. We need the pasuk of Yatsa B'Shnas HaYovel for the following. The pasuk reads Yatsa B'Shnas HaYovel, turning to the top of Tezayin with Aleph. Are we talking about an Oved Kochavim who you have some control over? Or perhaps it's the case that the Oved Kochavim is not under your watch. Says the Gemara Amr, so I don't understand. If you don't have him under your control, that doesn't even make any sense. It must be that even by this Oved Kochavim, the pasuk means that if he's under your control, you have to let him go by Yovel. So that's how Rebbe learns out this pasuk. We'll stop right here at the 2 dots. We will have shiur tomorrow night. We won't have shiur Wednesday or Thursday. I'll post shiurim. Wishing you all a beautiful night.